One of the biggest obstacles to believing in God for a lot of people is the problem of evil or the problem of suffering. And there's no getting around it. There's a lot of suffering in this world. But I think the problem isn't so much that there's so much suffering as that the suffering is not evenly distributed, or at least is not distributed in proportion to what we think people deserve. If everyone suffered the same, or if everyone suffered according to their own misdeeds, I think we'd complain a lot less about it. It could be that the suffering is even worse than it is, but if it was evenly distributed, it would just be normal to us. And I don't think we would see that as big of an impediment to believing in God as it does now. If you've ever been a parent, you've heard, it's not fair. And you look at the world and you say, it's not fair. And you're right. It isn't fair. There's no getting around it. It's not fair. And that's the thing that gets in the way for a lot of people of believing in God. The argument usually goes something like, if there's all this suffering and God doesn't stop it, either he's unable to stop it, in which case he's not all powerful, or he's not willing to stop it, in which case he's not all good. That's a very strong argument, and it's hard to refute. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I have the answer to it. What I will say is it's not an argument based on reason and rationality. It's an argument based on emotion. It's our emotions that we use to define what constitutes good. If we decide that God allowing suffering in a manner that's not proportional to what people deserve, if we define that as not good, we have to realize that's our own emotions telling us that that's not good. There's no scientific experiment that we can perform that will tell us that that's not good. We start with our underlying emotions and derive our own belief about what constitutes good. And then we use that to assess whether the God described in the Bible is good or is not good. So I certainly don't claim that I have the big grand answer to it. I'm one of those people who has suffered way less than I would assess that I deserve. And my father is one who suffered way more than I would think he deserved. He was a better man than I am, and yet suffered tremendously more than I have. So I can either accept that, or I can decide based on my emotion, my deep love for my father, that God isn't good because he allowed that to happen. But I realize that if I do that, that's my emotions. That's not my reason and my intellect telling me that I should have a problem with how God decided to do that. It's also an argument from a predetermined belief. I believe that suffering is not good. And then I use that belief as an argument to say that if God allows suffering, then God is not good. Any reasoning I put into it comes from my underlying predetermined definition of what good is, an unprovable definition of good. I cannot do a science experiment and determine, and therefore suffering is not good. So if you're trying to assess the question of whether there's a God in a reasoned, rational manner, the problem of suffering isn't really going to help you one way or the other. Because if you find the other arguments for the existence of God sound, and the only thing in the way of you believing in him is the problem of suffering, then the only thing in the way is your own emotions. On the other hand, if you don't find the other arguments sound, this one doesn't really make much of a difference.